Welcome everybody. So good to see all of you here.
Hello everyone.
We give a minute or two for more people to come in. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making it this evening. Looking forward. We still have a couple of people joining in. Waiting room is filling up.
Hello everyone. We're going to start in a few minutes, just waiting for people to come on in. Good to see people from all over the world here. Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Thailand. You know, our Sri Lankan colleagues are going to recognize this song.
We still have people coming through the waiting room. Maybe we should close the waiting room at some point so that they can come directly in, right?
All right, I've closed the waiting room.
Okay, so maybe it's time to start. Hello and welcome to the third and last session of Peace Corps' International Speaker Series for English educators in Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and Thailand. And actually now, come to think of it, many other parts of the world too. Gina and I from Sri Lanka will be your host today. I'm Priyanka Mendis. I'm training manager for Peace Corps Sri Lanka. And I am so glad to see all of you here today. At the moment, we have 437 on the call, but we had up to over 700 both yesterday and day before. So maybe people will join in as we go along. So glad to see that you have joined. This is an opportunity for us to come together, to connect and to grow. And we would just like to invite you to enjoy the session as you learn. So most of the time you will be on mute during the main session, but we do encourage you to participate fully, unmute yourselves, open out your videos during the breakout room session.
Hello, everyone, and my name is Gina Grotlishin, and I am the Director of Programming and Training for Peace Corps Sri Lanka. Before we start, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge those that were planning this International Speaker Series and who made it happen. We have Sankim and Lisa from Cambodia, Michelle, Grace, and Mim in Thailand, and Priyanka and me, who are from Peace Corps Sri Lanka. Note that Pri and I will be also doing the tech support today. So if you have any tech issues, please feel free to reach out to us individually, and we'll see if we can help. Otherwise, all of us on the planning committee can help you navigate through this session today. So our goal in this series, if you don't mind hitting the next slide, please. And for those of you who've been here for 3 days, you've heard our goal, which is to share international best practices, connections, and support in English language education for Peace Corps stakeholders and counterparts. And that's all of you. And we're so happy that you're here today. So we hope that you find this session and this series in general an encouragement for you as you navigate the importance of your roles as educators during these challenging times.
So our speakers on this series included international experts who spoke on a range of topics. Luis Valdez, the Director of Programming Training at Peace Corps Vietnam, spoke on the power and the opportunity of creative writing in challenging times. Yesterday, Dr. Pragasit Sitikun, professor at Thammasat University in Thailand, spoke on the importance of critical thinking in the pandemic. And today, Peace Corps' global education expert, Brock Brady, will be speaking on teaching in the times of COVID, sharing strategies for online learning. So let's move on to a little bit about the format of these sessions and what to expect and how to participate. So our agenda will include insights and teachings from our speakers. I would encourage you to use the chat feature to ask questions and to connect with one another. The agenda will also include breakout rooms later in the session and provide a chance for you to connect with others from different countries in smaller groups and discuss what we are learning and share best practices. So please turn on your cameras and your mics and participate fully in those breakout rooms. It will not be facilitated, so someone just put your hand up, take the leadership and facilitate the group. So we will come back to the large group here to conclude and to share handouts and files for you to keep after the session. So be prepared to copy and paste it onto your device. So you do not have to send us your email address. We will share it on the chat and you need to be prepared to copy it off the chat. Gina is going to tell us a little bit about the certificate.
Yes, we just want to make sure that you're all aware that if you attended 3 sessions today, it is important that you submit the evaluation, and that evaluation will trigger your ability to receive a certificate from us. We really want to acknowledge your participation of attending all 3 days. So the survey that you'll get at the end of the session will ask you some questions about how you felt about the sessions and just get some general feedback, but also that's very important for you in order to get that certificate. So please make sure that you get that certificate or to get that survey, which will be given to you in the chat at the end of the session, the last 15 minutes, most likely.
So be sure you're there in the last 15 minutes. Now, as you can see on the screen, we are going to try a quick poll. We want to see who is here and who you are, what country you're from. So Gina is going to pull up the poll. I've just put the questions on the slide for you in case you cannot see the poll. So what we learned yesterday and day before was that the poll does not work in large groups as well as it should. Those of you who are seeing the poll, please respond. And those who don't, the poll is about what country you're from. And if you like, you can put it on the chat. If you cannot see the poll only. If you can see the poll, please answer on the poll. So that is the first question we want to find out. So there are people from the US, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Cambodia, and a couple of people from other countries too. So we can see almost 50% of you responding to the poll. Thank you. There's also a second question on the poll. We want to know what your work is. So I'm working as an English teacher, a trainer of teachers, staff of the Ministry of Education, not yet a teacher, but in training and other. So do scroll down on your poll and look at your second question. If you are not seeing the poll, you can answer on the chat, but if not, please look for the poll and answer on the poll. So,
all right, we have about half of the people that have submitted. And the numbers are starting to slow. So should I share?
Okay, yeah, maybe we can complete the poll there, conclude it there. So the results of the poll are, yeah, we have a large number of people from Cambodia, Thailand, and Sri Lanka, and United States, and 3% from other countries too. And we seem to be having a lot of English teachers, 55%, and trainers supporting English teachers, 20%, Ministry of Education staff, 8%, and trainees, 7%, and others, 11%. So that's who we are today. Welcome to each and every one of you, whoever you may be. And I'm going to pass it on to Gina to introduce our presenter for the day.
So I have the privilege of introducing Mr. Brock Brady. He's an education expert for the United States Peace Corps in Washington, D.C. He's going to be speaking with us today on the presentation, Teaching in the Time of COVID, Strategies for Online Learning. So Brock, as I mentioned, is currently the education expert for the U.S. Peace Corps. Prior to the Peace Corps, Mr. Brady was co-director of the TESOL program at American University for 12 years. Mr. Brady has also served as president and board member of TESOL International, as well as president of the Washington Area TESOL Association. Mr. Brady was an English teaching assistant in Paris and served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Togo, West Africa. From 1993 to 1997, Mr. Brady was director of the American Language Center for the first in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, and later in Cotonou, Benin. Mr. Brady served as a lecturer in English in the Pohang Institute of Science and Technology in South Korea. So he has experience all over the world and in this region. He has participated in 7 English language specialist assignments. And we're so grateful that he's able to talk with us here today. We're very looking forward to learning from you, Mr. Brady, and I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you for being here. Brock, are you there? I think maybe I need to unmute him. Sorry about that, Brock.
Can you hear me?
Yes, but we can't see you.
Yes,
See you.
Can I help?
Right now, I think we're going to share your screen, share your presentation. So I'm not, maybe you could turn on and off your camera to see if that'll help.
Okay. Oh, shoot.
That's fine. You can talk us through the PowerPoint.
Absolutely.
Without
Yeah,
turning
you
your
don't
video
need to
on.
look at me.
We'd like to, but that's fine.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I really want to thank the Peace Corps staff from Cambodia, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. They've really put a lot of time and effort into this, and I think it's a good inauguration of a new era of collaboration across countries and across people who are teaching in similar but different sorts of circumstances. Another thank you I want to make as I begin is a thank you to Jennifer Lubkin Chavez, who was one of my graduate students at American University. And she did the original version of this session, so she really deserves credit for that. So looking at COVID in the times, or looking at online learning in the times of COVID, you know, I think a lot of teachers are afraid of online teaching. And I've got to tell you, I know that whenever someone wants me to introduce a new piece of technology, I get kind of anxious about it. And I know that when I actually start using a new piece of technology, despite telling myself, hey, I'm smart enough to make this work, it either doesn't work or it works through such a convoluted process that I have pretty clear evidence that I must not have done something right, as we're doing right now. So I hope to be able to help you discover what you already know about online teaching, and that you'll walk away from the session today much more confident. So when the time comes, you'll be ready to teach online, okay? Next slide. So very simple. Today, we're going to look at some online teaching and try to see it from your perspective. And remember, you don't have to do it perfectly. When you're working with online situations, perfection is something that will almost always escape. And that's one of the themes that I really want to insist on today. Don't go for perfect, go for good enough. And when you're evaluating your students, don't strive for perfections. If the students are doing it good enough, we want to keep that. Now, online teaching is different, but it's not from another planet. So we have most of us have a really sound foundation about moving into online teaching. And our objective today is modest. When you see something that you think, oh, excuse me. Our objective today, when you see something we covered, you think, oh, I know something about that. Next slide. Learning is learning. Click. And you know about learning. Your teachers. Next slide. So we know the principles of good teaching. Do you have the students engaged? Are they actively learning? Do they sometimes even have fun in class? Sometimes we forget about fun. And then we want to think about the learning objectives also. Now, my definition of a learning objective is a very simple one, and that is, what can the students do at the end of the class, the session, the course that they couldn't do before? And we want to think a lot about the alignment between learning objectives, where do we want them to get to, and the activities and the way we assess those activities to make sure that they lead to the learning objectives. And then another thing I think is really present, particularly in online teaching, is, are you present in your class? Do your students, it's not just a matter of being there physically, but do the students have a sense that you've set things up in advance, that you have everything under control, and that they can trust you to make things happen? And I have to say, for the tech team here, they've really been present for me. So that's a good example of what we mean by presence in this term. The next slide. There's nothing here that will surprise you, but it's good to do a quick little review. Learning results from practice, from interaction, from scaffolding. I want to talk about scaffolding just briefly, but I'll come back to that later. Repetition, variety, giving good feedback, and then sitting back and reflecting on all that you learned. For those of you that are not familiar with the expression scaffolding, literally scaffolding are the poles, the metal, and the wood that you put around a building that you're going to build. And as you build the building higher and higher, the scaffolding goes higher and higher to support the work. And then when the building is complete, you take the scaffold away, and then you have the building. So in teaching, scaffolding is holding the students up to do what they couldn't do without your support. And you support them and you give them practice, and finally they internalize the knowledge, and then you can take your support away. So that's scaffolding, and I think it's a very important concept. Next slide, next click. Learning requires multiple kinds of input, and it requires engagement, so that your classroom becomes kind of a sense, a space of community. And it's a space where students feel like they're participating. Click. And finally, learning is enhanced by having a sense of community, by doing authentic activities, by giving agency to the learners. And agency is the feeling that I can do this, I can make decisions. And most importantly of all, a sense of progress. Next slide. Now, thinking about aligning and assessing learning, we have our learning objectives. We've talked about that. What can they do now? But we also want to be assessing as we go along. So at the beginning of this lesson, we've given the students some sorts of knowledge or some things to think about. What can they do using that knowledge in the rest of the class? And then another issue that's very important is, how will you know, how will you assess their learning? And then finally, how will you know when they've learned enough? And again, we're thinking a little bit about that good enough objective. Have they got what they need to be able to do everything you wanted them to do, even if it's not perfect? Next slide, please. Now, I think this is an important slide. We see technology, COVID, and remote or online teaching and learning. I can't stress this enough. They're all challenges, but they're not the same challenge. And I think that's good news in a way, because in a little bit, when we're trying to teach and we're dealing with the panacea, we try to address everything at once. And I think that leads to frustration, and I think sometimes we feel like we're not gaining success. So I really encourage you to think of each of these three challenges as independent. And maybe at one point, maybe at one point you have a situation where you can deal with the technology and you can make it work better for you. Well, work on that and make it work. And then when that's sorted out, when you know that what you intended to do either worked or didn't, then you can look at some of the others, but don't try to do it all at once. Next slide. Okay, another check post here on our road. Be kind. These are hard times. We can't have enough of kindness. Next click. And this is the situation we're in. And so we have to adapt to it. Nobody particularly likes it, but we're going to hang in there and we're going to see the light of day at some point. But in your classroom, because this is the reality, grade more flexibly, please, than perhaps you have done before. Give feedback, but make sure when you're giving feedback, you're being gentle and constructive, and not just making the student feel like they haven't succeeded. And maybe think a little bit more about student participation and what students and the product the students produce. And don't worry so much about competition, about measuring students against each other. Let each student be an evaluation point in themselves. Next slide. Okay, I want to talk to you very briefly about three approaches to learning, and we're not going to go into them in depth, but they're often spoken of, and so I thought it would be good to give a little bit of attention to them. In fact, I understand that there may be many of you that are working in systems where there's a focus on competency-based learning. Just a second here. And competency are the skills that are needed to be competent in something. And so competency-based learning is made up of a lot of skills, and these skills are necessary to have the competency that you desire in this particular situation. So in competency-based learning, each student is on a personal journey, and they're going to be looking in different directions and doing things in slightly different ways than others. And we give them flexibility in setting their own place, because we acknowledge that learning can happen at any time or place, and we want to be able to be flexible enough so that the students can follow when they start learning. We want to focus on both formative and summative ways of measuring objectives. And just very quickly, formative assessment is when you're assessing as you're going along. You're in the classroom and you're teaching, and you want to know, are the students understanding this? Have they understood my example? And so you ask a question, and maybe it's a yes/no question. So you put hand up for yes and no for down, but you just check to make sure that the students are following what you're trying to teach. And if you find a problem that they're having difficulty understanding, why, then you can stop and go back. And then summative assessments are those that happen at the end of the class. And that's the point where we ask, did they learn everything that we needed them to learn? Another important concept about competency-based learning is it's not about how many hours your classroom time was put in or how many semesters you completed. It's about what the assessment shows in terms of achieving the learning objectives. Next slide. And then two other kinds of X-based learning I want to put in there because they often come up in online teaching. The approaches below are both a little bit different, but they're similar enough that you can almost think about them in the same way. The one thing that's clear is they engage students to do things that are authentic, to do things that are real. And the two types are project-based learning, and there you do a project. The example I really like to give about projects is, oh, maybe you have your class design a student newspaper. And so different students have to take on different roles to be able to get the copy and to do the editing and to figure out the format. And then they finally finish their product and they share it out in the school. So that's an example. They're actually doing a project. You might have students do a food drive to provide food to people that are in need. Again, that's a project-based learning situation. Tasks are a little bit more about carrying out skills that happen in other contexts. Some examples I would give of task-based learning is learning how to use a telephone in a business setting, or asking for directions, or ordering in a restaurant. So the students have to work together to figure out how they could do that successfully. And as that's fine, go ahead. And in all of these, as we're looking at achieving the project or achieving the activity, we're also bringing language skills in if we're teaching English or if we're teaching language, including spelling, pronunciation, different degrees of politeness, all those things that have to do with good communication. Oh, here's another one of our signposts. Focus on learning objectives, prioritize what counts, and aim for good enough. Don't try to do everything. Try to do what's very important and do it well enough. Okay, next slide. Now, today I'm going to focus quite a bit on flipped learning because a lot of people talk about it. And rather to trying to address many different approaches to online learning, let's take one that's well known and work with that. Now, I had kind of an awakening as I was preparing this session for you all. You know, when we look at our lesson plan, we know our lesson plan has many different steps from beginning to end. And so you might say, I've got 3 steps in my lesson plan, or I've got 4 steps. And that's true, and that's what you do. But I'm thinking when you visualize a classroom as a cultural activity, I think it very often has 2 parts, and I'm going to be interested to see if you think this is true. In most classes, traditional teacher walks in and says, today we're going to learn about whatever the topic is. And then throughout that class, particularly if it's a class that's starting at the beginning of a course unit, the teacher will explain what the concept is, and she'll give examples of it. And what you will find, I think more often than not, is probably something like the first half of the class, or maybe even more, is very, very teacher-centered, and the teacher is focused on giving knowledge. And indeed, the knowledge she's giving is good, and the way she's giving the knowledge is well presented. But it's all about the teacher. And then after the teacher has explained everything and has answered all the students' questions, they'll probably go on with some activity where the students can try out a little bit what the teacher is doing. And typically that activity won't be too demanding because the teacher is thinking, well, you need to kind of see how this works. And then what's the other part of the lesson? The other part of the lesson is the homework. So the class is over, the students go home, and they do the homework. But think about your lessons, or think about lessons you had when you were a student. And I think you'll often find that while you were given some examples by the teacher of how to solve a problem or how to do a certain task, the more complicated problems come when the students are home and they don't have anybody that they can engage with to help them out. So I see traditional classes having 2 big parts. There's the information giving that leads to the content of the course. And then there's the activities that the students do, having received that open, easier course. And I was trying to find ways to think about how to represent flipped learning better when I found this slide. And I think it helps a lot. And I think the idea of flipped learning in the most direct sense is, instead of the teacher taking the time to explain the topic and to explain easy aspects of it, that part of the job is given to the students. And the students take that information and the supporting documents that go with it, and they work in pairs or they work in small groups. And it's a little bit of a challenge, but they work together to carry out the assignments and using the information that the teacher would usually give. And then when that's done, the outcomes, this completed assignments that the students produced, are given to the teacher, and the teacher can look them over and they can see where the students did very well, where it was easy for them. And she knows, maybe I don't need to spend so much time on that, but she looks at other things that the students have tried to do and, wow, there's some more challenges there. We need to work on that a little bit more. So when everybody's pulled together again back in the class the next day, they can work together trying to figure out how to address the difficulties and trying to understand the ways that the students could do it better. So you're moving into a more interactive communal sort of role. So with flipped learning, you start out of class and the students are working without the teacher, but they're working with deep support from the teacher and materials that she has developed for the students to take on. And then when the assignments are available to her, she can look through those and find out where additional help needs to be made. And so she's assessing the learning. And from that assessment, she can move on to in-class activities where there's much of a sense of everybody working together to solve the problem, everybody working together to help others to understand. It's much more engaged. Next slide, please. And I hear all of you know everything about Bloom's taxonomy. So I won't go into any detail of that. And I have it here. I have an exemplar of it here just to help me explain a situation. Because I know a big question that many, many teachers have is, what do you flip? What does it mean to flip something, and what kinds of materials do you flip? And I'll give you two examples here. And I think that they're everyday enough that they can be some help to you. The first thing I want you to think about as a teacher is, I know that you have lessons that you do that work really well, and you've done them before and you do them again. And when they come up, they know that you know that you've got to teach the students on. And sometimes students even make additional contributions because they're so engaged with it. That's just one of your lessons. Well, if that's just one of your lessons, that's probably a good one to flip, because it'll be easy to flip because you know that lesson, you own that lesson. So if you have to make some changes, that's a good place to do it. Or if you're looking at other sorts of content, one trick, and I think this is a really clever trick, is you have your textbook. And maybe in some cases, not every student has a textbook, but hopefully the teacher has a textbook. Take that textbook and open it to the chapter that you're going to be working on. And I think I can promise you that if you look at the first 2 pages of that textbook lesson, you'll find that there's a lot of information in there, but it's not difficult. It's relatively easy, it's relatively straightforward. And it's introducing the students into the lesson itself. So what you're doing in flipped learning, when you have the students working in pairs or groups without the teacher right there present all the time, you know that that opening information is something that you can build into a flipped lesson. So thinking about Bloom's taxonomy in flipped classes is that we want to design flip classes in a way that they encourage students to remember, to understand, and maybe to a certain extent apply, but the student context shouldn't be those more highly developed cognitive skills of evaluation, analysis, etc. Okay? A couple of places where you might look for classes to flip. Next slide. So here are the principles of learning laid out much more straightly. The teacher flips what the students do at home in class, and she provides good foundations. You'll hear a lot of talk about video and audio recordings in flipped classes, and that's partly to engage students. So dialogues, videos, an activity that they engage in, a text they read and talk about, or maybe a picture. And all of these introductions, all of these initial features are followed by controlled activities. Now, controlled activities, I'm sure most of you know, is it one that only has one right answer. So controlled activities are typically easier for students to do. Semi-controlled activity gives a little bit more, but not a lot, a little bit more autonomy to students. There might be a couple of choices involved there. And then, of course, relatively uncontrolled activities are more authentic and more communicative if you're looking at English. And then moving on down with flipped learning, when the student assignments are completed, they're distributed to the teacher, and the teacher looks to find what they have struggled over and where they were successful, and then they can get back together in the class, whether it be together on Zoom or together in real time. And talk through where the difficulties were and come up with solutions for the difficulties. And then when that's done, there may be another version of assignments as students clean them up. But coming soon then, the students will have homework to take home and they will start another cycle of flipped learning. Next slide. Thanks. We have another signpost. And we're not making this too difficult. This is the entry of it. So which of the following is true, these two thoughts? The first one is, oh, flipped learning. I have to cover all the same content and I have less time to work with it and more challenges. Or, well, I have to focus on learning objectives, but neither I or my students need to do everything. We'll take a look and see. We'll have to look and see and think about what works best for us. We need to be flexible and we need to be ready to negotiate about where we spend our time. Next slide. Yeah, choose the second one. Good idea. Maybe we could make that a new mantra. Choose the second one. Some benefits of flipping. This is the most one, is students can work when they need to work. Oops, we need to go back one. Yeah, they can work at their own pace. And if they didn't get something the first time, they can go back and do it again. They can go back again until they mastered it. And if you're in a language class, if students can review the activities again and again so that they feel like they've really internalized the language feature. And then the students spend more time practicing. And by doing that, when students come back to the class, whether it be face-to-face or real-time, they've got a knowledge base of the lesson so that they can go forward. And as I said before, they spend more time practicing. They can take on more initiative. And they can receive more immediate feedback because they can get it from the teacher as they're discussing the problems they had before. But I think the most important benefit of learning is that students have to learn how to solve their own problems. And if we can help our students get used to solving their own problems, whether it be in a classroom, whether it be out in the world, we've done them a big favor. And then finally, we find that students oftentimes are much more motivated to get involved because they see their classmates working and solving problems and turning in assignments. They want to keep up with that. They want to get in on it too. Next slide. The challenges. We've been told that countries that tend to have a rote learning tradition, that is, the teacher is the sage on the stage that imparts the information, and the students in many ways are writing down the information that the professor gives. And then the test is based in some ways about how well the students can repeat or put into place the information that the teacher has given. Students that are used to learning that way may need a little bit of time to adjust to a flipped method, because with a flipped method, we do ask them to take on a little bit more responsibility, and we do encourage them to be more initiative taking and creative. It takes time and effort to develop the materials. That's the biggest complaint. But the good news is that when you're developing materials for a flipped class, once you put them together one time, you can use them in other iterations of the class. You don't have to start over from the beginning many times. And the teachers may have difficulty getting comfortable with the structure of the class, because what happens in the class may depend a lot about what the information is that the teacher has got from the previous assignments. So sometimes you may be making adjustments to help the students as you're going along. And that lack of structure is sometimes not very pleasant. So those are some challenges of flipped learning. Next slide. Some basic principles of flipped learning, and I'll go through these fast. You'll have the slideshow. You have to prepare everything in advance of the course, and course can be fully asynchronous, which means that the students never interact directly with the teacher in the same time period, but rather everything is set up for when they get there. And sometimes and then synchronous learning is when the teacher and the classroom are together. And you can have classes that have a little bit of synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. And flipped learning typically is a combination of those two. You need to have all the assignments and units prepared in advance and released to the students ahead of time so that they have some flexibility and control over things they are doing. And in class, the teacher's role is to facilitate synchronous sessions, giving feedback, grading, answering questions, and building community and trust. And very, very important, and this is for any class, is you need to have regular patterns of activities. That if in the first class you have this kind of activity in the first part of the class, and then there's another activity that's done in the middle of the class, 2/3 of the way through the class, another activity, and then a final activity, you should always move in that direction. You should always use the same sequencing of activities. Why? Well, once your students understand that the structure of the class is always going to be the same, they have freed up processing space that they would normally use to figure out what are we doing now, to concentrate on the content they're learning. So keeping a fixed structure to your class really helps your students learn. Routines are so good. Next slide. Related to that, navigating should be really clear. You need to have written instructions in the language the students can understand. Before all activities and before all videos, it should be clear what students do with the assignments. And you should make sure that the technology is something that's working well and won't distract from learning. And feedback is really important because it's more difficult to give because sometimes the teacher is at a different place than the students. So teachers should really focus on giving feedback and doing it as promptly as possible, and follow up with it and give some opportunities so that students can react to the feedback that the teacher has given. Next slide. Thanks. So I can have a drink of water right now. Here are some tools for flipped learning that I think will be very interesting and give you an opportunity to reflect a little bit on other elements of flipped learning and how you design the materials for it. Can we go ahead with the slideshow?
Brock, would you like us to share that video?
If you can, yes.
Yeah, I absolutely can. So Mim, do you want to stop share and I'll share here? Try this again. Can you see?
Yes, I can't hear, but I can see. There. Great.
Yes, we can hear.
When a lot of people think about flipped classrooms, they start thinking about videos. Lots and lots of videos. Video, 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 video. And video has a technological component to it, and a lot of people then think that the flipped classroom is a technological solution. Well, we think a flipped classroom is a pedagogical solution with a technological component. A very large technological component. So let's get some of these tech tools on the table so we can get you the tools that you need to start flipping your class.
But Aaron, why do I need to make my own videos? There's lots of videos out there. 2 + 2 = 4, whether I say it or somebody on the internet says it.
Well, you're right, there's plenty of material out there, but I think it's really best for teachers to try at least to make their own content. There's a relational aspect that you have with your students that no one else in this world has, and you cannot replace that by using someone else's material. So I've decided to make my own video content. I don't know the first thing about making videos. What do I need to make this happen?
I know a teacher. He hands the phone to a student and said, "Can you help me make a video after class?" And they shoot the video of him standing at the chalkboard, and then he posts the video online.
And if you choose a student who's struggling, that student is going to get it twice. They're going to see you when they're there live with you, and then they can go back and view that video content again.
Differentiated instruction. Another tool for making flipped class videos are screencasting programs. Whatever is on the screen is recorded.
And in case you haven't noticed, tablets are everywhere. And there are a plethora of whiteboarding apps for tablets that you can write on the screen, bring in pictures, record your audio to produce video content for your students. Okay, so now that you've created some video content, where are you going to put it so your students can access it?
There's a plethora of sites such as YouTube and Vimeo you can use. But what if your kids don't have access? A lot of kids, well, they don't have access to the technology. What do you do then?
We have physical media that we could use. We have USB drives. They're relatively inexpensive. Get a few of those, check them out to your students as needed, or you could burn them onto a DVD.
So with all these tools for creation and sharing of the videos, we're often asked which is the best tool or tools that you should use. Ultimately, it depends upon you. What technology are you comfortable with? What do you actually have? That's the tool that's going to be best for you.
All right, back to you, Brock.
Thank you. So if we can move on to the next slide, I'll speed things up a little bit so you all can have some chances to discuss about this afterwards. Plus, I think that we're getting more into details as we move along. So here are some tips for making your own videos. Keep them short. I think you know that, somewhere between 6 and 10 minutes. If you're making audio presentations, make sure that they're clear and that there's no static. It's very important that every student be able to understand them. And you'll notice that I didn't make my own original video. So lean on YouTube if you're looking for a subject. And I think very often if you go to YouTube, you'll find something up there that you can use that will give a little bit of a variety to your students. So that's just a tip to think about. Next slide. Another signpost. Be flexible so all students have a real opportunity to succeed. And particularly in these days, recognize that students have to deal with health, with their finances at home, with what's going on at the home, with family obligations. All of that can change. You need to have your eyes open to students who suddenly have a change in behavior, and you want to do everything you can, I know you do, to try to accommodate them. Next slide. Tips for tech. A couple of them I think are really important. Is you don't have to be an expert for using technology. Again, we're back to that idea of being good enough to do what you need to do. And a good rule of thumb is never try to incorporate more than 3 different types of technology in your classroom. Don't forget that if the instruction is not in English, you may have non-native English speaking students who struggle with the technology and the computer and literacy. So they're going to need a little bit more support. Particularly, you may want to help them rehearse a little bit more. And another thing that's very important if technology does go down is all of your assignments, all of your lessons should have a contingency backup plan. Now, there's two ways you can do that. One way you can do a backup plan is to have paper and pen copies of all the assignments. And if you're making flips courses that are based on your previous course, you may well have those paper and pen assignments there, and all you need to do is give students a packet of those that they can use if technology fails. Another suggestion that's a good one is these days flash drives are not very expensive. You could put the content on a flash drive. Next slide. Tools for remote teaching. Probably the biggest tool is the one we're using now, Zoom, for video conferences. But you want to think also about class resources and about where you're going to store them and access assignments and videos so that students don't have any trouble accessing them. I think that you can't go on doing online teaching for very long without an LMS, a learning management system. An LMS is kind of a hub for the teachers and the students. The teachers send their assignments in. If they want to know what the assignment is for the next class, they can go to the LMS. The teacher, if she discovers that she wants to add a new assignment, she can bring it into the LSM. If there's library readings, they can be listed there. Grades can be listed there. So the LMS is really important, and there's many different types. Communication should be two ways: teacher, student, student, teacher. Video recording is very helpful. Make sure that your assessments, your quizzes and assignments are not too demanding. In fact, see if they can't be kind of engaging. With grades, you can put them up on your LMS, but try to make them more about tracking progress than about critiquing who's doing well and who's not. Next slide. Just some basic tips about Zoom and how to make it work well. I'll skip this, and if you want to go back and look at this in detail, it's available to you in the packet. And going on to the next slide, we talked at the very beginning about the importance of teacher presence, even when the teacher is not there. The students should never feel like the class is teacherless, like there's nobody in charge. So what can you do to give a sense of presence? Every new unit, or maybe even every lesson, leave a message of support at the beginning of the week to the students. Oh, today we're going to do this. I think you'll like this activity, and I'm interested to see what you do with this. That sort of friendly message. Have a weekly check-in time for students in case they need guidance. So let's say you have a class on a Monday and a Thursday, you might on Tuesday have a class so that students have questions. They can, or not a class, they can log in and along with other students, find ways to keep going on the assignment. If you have a weekly discussion forum, which kind of builds community and gives students an opportunity to practice the concepts, make sure that you have a prompt to launch it, and again, maybe related to the students' experiences in their daily lives. And have a system so that students can contact you, but make sure it's clear that you give advice on how they will contact you, what kind of medium they will use, when you're available to be contacted, and how long you can be available. Otherwise, they can bother you 24 hours a day. Next slide. Again, something you can check on your own, a checklist to test your readiness. Can you share a meeting on Zoom? Can you monitor a chat and participant panels? Can you handle the breakout rooms? Okay, so this is a way to check yourself to see how well you're advancing in online learning. And the next slide talks about some very simple but important assessments that you should think about carrying out. The first one, comprehension checks. Comprehension checks are do the students understand what you've communicated to them? You know, very often you give instructions to the students, and you ask, do you understand? And everybody says yes, but then they go back to their pair or their group, and the first thing you hear is, now what are we supposed to do? So comprehension checks are to avoid that. Mastery checks, how are they progressing? Are they getting close to achieving those learning objectives? Homework checks, pretty obvious. Are they doing the homework? Are there parts of the homework that was giving them problems? And then temperature checks. How are the students feeling? Is this going okay? Is it too complicated? Do we need to make some changes? And next slide gives you some opportunities to think about peer interaction. But I want to tell you that I am a strong advocate of peer interaction. When students can work together or work in small groups, they're really building their confidence, and they're really building their sense of being someone in the community. Plus, if it's always peer interaction, if, for example, you have peers observing each other, the first peer that has done the observing has to be very polite and gentle with her partner, because then the other partner is going to be observed. And if the first partner gave some unpleasant remarks, then everybody's in trouble. So peer work keeps everybody responsible and polite. The next slide are just some steps to ask yourself about how you're moving along, and are you covering all the touch points for online learning? Next slide, please. And an aspiration I want you to think about is adopt a growth mindset. Think more about how we're becoming better people, how we're learning more, and not so much on, did they get this grade? And encourage that same, let's go for it feeling from your students. Because COVID is both a challenge and an opportunity. Next slide. And before I give thanks to some people who very much need thanks, I'd like to share some closing thoughts, if you don't mind. But first of all, take a deep breath. Come on, do it. And put all that aside. You have nothing to worry about. You are teachers. You will figure out what needs to be done, and you'll do it. You do that all the time. Administration comes in and says, oh, here, use this new textbook. You adapt and get it done. Or they say, implement a totally new assessment system, and you're kind of growling and saying what was wrong with the old system, but you find a way to do it. Oh, new curriculum. And then who knows how often, how many changes of school policy occur that you have to adapt to. And then there are the students. But you are the teacher who can get to that student that nobody else can get to, so that student starts making some progress. You deal with the students that come in hungry, or those that have had trouble at home. You are that person who, faced with an unpleasant, unreasonable parent, just smiles. You are the one who likely has a whole second job waiting for you when you get back home. But you are also the person who, after school one day, finds standing at your door one of your students from 10 years ago who wants to thank you for all she learned in your class. You trust and care for your students as they care for you. Do you think that online learning, let alone COVID, is going to defeat you? No way. You're teachers. And as one teacher to a student, thank you very much, Jennifer, for your help on this. Interesting to see what you all talk about. That's good.
Thank you so much, Brock. Now at this point, we're going to go into breakout sessions. We've learned a lot. We got a lot of information, and I think you're right. We have to take it one step at a time, take big deep breaths and how we're going to move forward on all this progress that we're making in terms of technology and how we use it in the classroom. And as well, there's just a lot going on in the world. And you know, we as teachers, we have to take a lot of these considerations and decide what we can do one step at a time. So what I'm going to do is post the questions in the breakout room. I've stopped the chat. The questions are in the breakout room. You're going to divide into groups of 6 or 8. And as pre-mentioned, you will have to self-facilitate those sessions. So jump into the rooms. Ideally, put your cameras on if you can. Take off the mute. You'll have the opportunity to do that and to share what you think about these questions. What do you want to learn most about online courses? What are you most concerned about regarding online teaching courses? I heard some of those in the chat. Technology, availability of internet. What are some other things? What is one good thing about online courses? What can make online courses difficult? And what tools or application have you used online? Mr. Brady has created these questions. We're going to put you in groups for you to be able to talk about these questions. I will share a slide with these questions in your groups, and please go ahead and have amazing conversations, self-facilitate. All right, so we're going to open the groups now, and we'll give you about 15 minutes, maybe a little less. Are you ready, Pri?
All right, enjoy the conversations in the groups. See you back in 15 minutes. So you should be seeing a message asking you to join the groups.
Okay,
so
for
those who are still in the room, you have to press join breakout room.
And team here, we have it on the 15-minute timer, and we'll let me.
Oh, where's the waiting room now? Oh, okay. Admit all.
Welcome back, everyone. We'll give it a few minutes while everybody rejoins. Welcome back. We'll give it a minute. As everybody comes back in, we see our numbers increasing. We're at 200. We'll try to get back to the numbers we were. before we start back up for the final few minutes of our session today.
Yeah, we hope that you have a lot of good discussion. It sounds very interesting, and to see the exchange between Thai teachers and Sri Lankan and Cambodian teacher was really wonderful.
Huh.
Absolutely. Brock, we'll pass it to you to say anything else for the day. And because it looks like our numbers are about at 600 and we'll get up to 650 where we were before. All right, we're seeing, we've opened up the chat again, everyone. So if you want to write a few comments about how your breakout room sessions were, what you learned, that would be great. We'd love to see a little bit of information about any conversations that you had. Definitely, you had people in your group that were from Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, possibly other places. So you all had diverse experiences to share about your teaching, about your education, about your teaching of teachers, and how you apply these things that we've learned from Brock today.
So we are seeing the responses on the chat. Wonderful breakout session, shared a lot of things. Learn techniques by sharing. Great discussion. Excited, great to hear from other countries.
And the one thing I think we also learned today was more about the breakout rooms concept as well. I think we've gotten better at it as we've gone from day 1, 2, and 3. We've heard that there were great conversations in there here on this day. So thank you.
That's great, because it wouldn't necessarily have to be that way.
Yeah. So Brock, any more to say from you? We so appreciate you being here.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm glad I was able to do this because I know a whole lot more about online flipped learning than I knew before. But also I'm happy because I feel like I've proved you can tell people how to prepare and engage in online learning without having all the time being taken up with practicing with the technology. You can treat them as two different animals for a while.
Absolutely. And I think that just kind of getting beyond that confidence as well and being able to try these new things is a big step for us all. So thank you so much for being here and teaching me things and teaching 650, 660 people from around the world new techniques in online learning, and particularly as we're navigating through COVID. So we really appreciate you focusing on the flipped model and really relating it to the Bloom's taxonomy as well. It's just great. Thank you. We want to thank all the international participants for your enthusiasm and your insightful preparation. I think we're all going to walk away more empowered and excited to use these tools and concepts in our teaching, particularly the three very different sessions. We've gotten very different things in the last 3 days. I want to especially thank all you for being here for all 3 days, for those of you that were able to attend. And I believe we've all been inspired to take our teaching to the next level and make our classes and our learning as student-centered as possible. So Priya, I'm going to pass it to you for the next section.
Yes, so we have disabled the chat for a little bit for you. We invite you to take a few minutes to fill in the evaluation that is found on the chat. Just click on it, go into SurveyMonkey and fill it up. We have done this on 3 days. So today is the last day. You will find today that in the last question, you will be asked, have you attended the first session, the second, and the third? So check the boxes as is appropriate. And if you have attended all three, we have asked you how we can send you the certificate if you need one. So if you do need a certificate, let us know your email address on the SurveyMonkey form, not on this chat. So just go there and start filling and you'll be fine. So we're going to give you a minute to do that. Click on the link on the chat, the last link that you can see, and fill up the evaluation. The evaluation itself is important for us because we would like to know whether we should continue organizing forums of this nature and how useful they are and how we can do it better. So we will take your feedback seriously. It is also important for the purpose of marking your attendance and for letting us know how we can send the certificate. It will be sent only after the 15th of November.
Great, so we're just going to give you a few minutes. Maybe we'll play a little bit of music, make sure everybody's able to do that. We really hope to get your feedback on this. It is sad not to see you all tomorrow afternoon.
Yes, we're kind of getting used to this now.
All righty, for those who've missed, we're taking a survey and the survey's in the chat. So feel free to click on the SurveyMonkey link in the chat. The chat is disabled, and complete that survey for us now. And that's going to be important, particularly if you attended all three sessions, and that will generate a certificate that will acknowledge that you were here for 3 days.
So I presume most of you have accessed the link and gone in. So I'm just going to open the chat in case anybody has a question. Is that all right? Okay. So
Maybe we should share the resources too,
yes.
before we open the chat.
Yes, Mim, I think you're going to share the resources. I'm going to close the chat for a bit again.
Yes, okay, so I am sharing the link to all the 3-day resources. You will find a presentation and some exercise from the speaker. So feel free to visit and download it off to your computer.
So it is a Google Drive and all the resources will be found there, right? So